Welcome to Rise and Reinvent, the podcast that explores the real, unfiltered journeys behind growth, leadership, and becoming who you were meant to be. I'm your host, Nicole M. Jones, and today's conversation is raw, honest, and deeply inspiring. Our guest, Pierre Vargas, a senior operations manager, lifelong athlete, and proud father whose journey from struggle to strength is a testament to what reinvention really looks like. He was raised in a culturally rich but emotionally complex environment. Pierre has faced challenges that most people never speak about, and he's turned them into fuel for transformation. In this episode, Pierre opens up about breaking generational patterns, finding healing from trauma, stepping into leadership as an introvert, and how a single pivotal moment helped him realize that he was the one holding himself back. He shares how cycling, meditation, and personal growth helped him become a better leader, not just at work, but in life. You'll hear hard won wisdom on managing with heart, building self worth, and redefining success, not by titles or salary, but by freedom, peace, and impact. This isn't a journey of professional growth, it's a story of emotional courage, personal truth, and the kind of resilience that changes everything. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Rise and Reinvent podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome Pierre Vargas. Pierre is a senior operations manager with an incredible story of reinvention. Pierre, welcome to the Rise and Reinvent podcast. Happy
Hey,
to see you today.
thank you for having me, Nicole. Good morning.
Good
Happy to
morning.
be here.
Good morning. So let's get started by having you briefly tell us about you, right? Not just your career, but your overall journey. Because oftentimes where we grew up and how we grew up often shapes what we become as an adult. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey in about, maybe 3 to 4 minutes.
All right. So name's Pierre, obviously. 46 years old. I was born in Puerto Rico to a Cuban father, Dominican mother. Raised mostly in the New York City area. I do have roots in New Jersey as well. I finished high school out there and did a couple years at junior college, finished trade school out there. I am a father to a 27-year-old who's currently in the Army. He's in Texas right now. I've been married for 10 years. I'm actually celebrating my 10th anniversary next month. So that's
Congratulations.
that's an accomplishment. That's an accomplishment these days. But we've been together since 2008, so I've been with her a long time. As for work, I've been in the public gaming profession close to 20 years in the casino industry. But when I say public gaming, that just means slot machines, electronic table game servicing, things of that nature. Started off as a technician, worked my way up to senior management. Like I said, I've been doing that close to 20 years. Outside of work, I'm very active. I love being outside. I'm an avid cyclist. I actually did 100 miles yesterday, so if I'm a little low energy this morning, excuse me for that. Yeah, I love cycling in my free time. I love being outdoors. Lifelong athlete. So being active is a big part of who I am.
That's awesome. Okay. So, what would you say is the greatest personal achievement that you're really proud of outside of your professional life?
Um, Let me see. That's a good question. I would say my recent greatest personal achievement is becoming financially literate. Um, I grew up in a family where credit wasn't talked about, savings and nothing like that. Like my parents were horrible with money. So So being financially literate has definitely been a big accomplishment for me as an adult. I would say my wife was an inspiration for that. Um, she was the first person I met that had like 800 credit score. I met her when she was 27, so for a young lady to have all of that was definitely eye opening for me to become financially literate. She made me realize I needed to get my act together. And obviously, when you find someone that you want to build with in life, you don't want to become a hindrance. You don't want to hold them back. So, she definitely inspired me to do that. So, but yeah, learning how to invest, learning how to save. Um, as an adult, I find that very important. So,
Absolutely. So, congratulations on that,
thank you.
because that is a big journey and something you may not be able to do at a young age. You're just trying to work and make the money and make sure you pay the bills and put food on the table. And then once you partner with someone, it's more important to manage the finances together and to understand your contributions. So, congratulations to you on mastering that achievement. The next question I have is, this podcast is all about reinvention. We often see on social media all the successful progress that people are making in their career, whether it's promotion or a new job or expanding their skills, but we rarely hear about the grit that it took to get there. We rarely hear about the pivots and the tough decisions that had to be made along the journey. And so, can you talk briefly about a pivotal moment in your journey that sparked your reinvention?
Oh, good question. Pivotal moment. Um, well, first of all, being broke is definitely is a pivotal moment, right? Especially in the New York City area. Um, Trying to think. I guess in my current profession, pivotal moment was I got to a point where I wanted more for myself, and like I didn't realize that I was holding myself back. I just felt like I wasn't really going anywhere. And I had a tough talk with myself that it was basically myself that was like I was basically holding myself back. um and when you come to that point, I started realizing that like a lot of my childhood trauma was holding me back. And it's uncomfortable when you have to face that. And you basically try to understand how your childhood trauma has been holding you back. And it was a pivotal moment where I basically had I had a tough talk with myself and basically told myself like, you're holding yourself back. If you want more in life, you basically have to face your fears and your trauma. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
So, whatever we are comfortable talking about regarding the trauma, can you talk about how that impacted you at a young age?
Okay, so basically, like a lot of adults, I was exposed to I basically had like sexual trauma.
Okay.
Um, I was exposed to sex way too young, and the effects of that trauma was basically low self-esteem, fear of being judged, being detached from life, basically, and difficulty trusting. So the past isn't always the past, right? So
Right.
until you understand your trauma, you carry that with you for the rest of your life.
Right.
So and that translates to not forming deep connections. Sometimes that could lead to substance abuse and mental health issues. Um so like I said, that was definitely holding me back. Like I can give this example. So I remember the first time I was up for a management position. Deep down inside, I didn't feel worthy of it. But the excuses I always made to myself was, oh, you're not management material. That's not who you are. That's not who you are as a person. But realistically, I was just making excuses for myself. Realistically, deep down inside, didn't have had low self-esteem, just didn't feel worthy of it. And just going back to what I said before, that's when I came to terms like, man, like I'm really my own worst enemy right now. Like, basically I just it came to a point where, like I said, I had to face my fears and take the next step, which is uncomfortable because, that's basically stepping outside of your comfort zone,
Mhm.
so yeah.
So, what type of support system did you have around you, or how did you come to the self realization that I'm holding myself back? I have to do something different because I am worthy. And I'm asking you these questions because there's someone out there with maybe a similar story and they're feeling stuck. They're feeling like they're alone. And this podcast can really inspire them to say, you know what? Maybe I'm the reason that I'm not getting the promotions and the money that I want to make in my career because of something that happened earlier in life, any kind of trauma. And so, what would you say in terms of what resources or support or just mental shift did you make through that transition to reinvent yourself?
Well, first of all, my support system was definitely my wife. Having these talks with her for years, these are feelings that I kind of held inside. Um, you know, I, like I come from a family that's like they're basically emotionally unavailable, so I never really learned how to, like how to talk my feelings out or anything like that. But definitely, my wife was a support system. The one thing I would tell someone who has that has these feelings is it's not your fault. I almost feel like I was at fault for these things growing up.
So, if you could speak to your younger self before this reinvention, what advice would you have given yourself back then?
Oh, well, there's a quote that I love, and it's basically beat yourself with a feather and not with a bat.
Okay.
Like I mentioned before, I was a young father. I had my son when I was 18. So, at the time I was supporting my son, myself, and his mother. So like I basically I had a lot of weight on my shoulders at the time. So, but what I'm trying to say is I was very hard on myself when I was younger. So one thing I would tell myself, my younger self, is give yourself some grace. Your 20s, they're basically made to make mistakes and you learn from them. But yeah, I used to beat myself up so much, stress myself out so much when I was younger, which is probably why I don't have a hairline now. But yeah, that's definitely what I would tell myself. Beat yourself with the feather, not with the bat. Give yourself grace. You're still young. You don't have life figured out. Um, yeah, just make sure you learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. So that is such a great message because a lot of times people strive for perfection or they strive, to be the best at what they're doing, but then they don't see the results on the back end. And so, beating yourself up, we are often our own worst critics.
For
Uh,
sure.
yeah. And so, yeah, just beat yourself up with a feather, learn from your mistakes, and then move forward. Like, don't live in the failure or the mistake.
Right.
So, my next question is related. So, in what ways has failure been a teacher for you? So sometimes people say, failure is tuition. Failure is learning, what you did wrong and making an adjustment so you don't make that same mistake again. Can you think of a time in your journey where you failed and you learned something and it really made a difference in your journey?
I mean, I guess in my profession, when I became a manager, I had no prior experience. to managing, and I really didn't have a coach. I was basically just thrown into management. I mean, well, obviously it was offered to me. I wasn't thrown into management, but yeah, I made a lot of mistakes during my early years of managing. Dealing with people. Anyone who works in field service knows, when you're working with staff, staff. I mean, in management, working with staff is probably the biggest challenge. But there were some failures, that I had, things that I could have done better, but learn from it. Became a better manager over the years. But yeah.
So as you thought about being a great manager, um, what was the inspiration for you? Like, how did you decide? Because management is, there's no like set way to be a manager, right?
Right.
You manage people based on what you know, what you've experienced, and sometimes what you want a manager to be for you, right? So to model that behavior and lead by example. As you thought about management with pretty much no training, it sounds like, how did you decide what your leadership and management style would be for your team or your staff?
Um, right. So I think the one thing that helped me as far as like my managing career, first of all, I'm not labeling myself as a great manager. You would have to ask my team how I am as a manager. But one thing that has helped me is that I can relate to my staff, being that I came from where they are basically. So like I can relate on a level of, like I was the disgruntled tech at one point. I was the overzealous technician at one point. I was the, do the bare minimum technician at one point. So, obviously I have all these type of technicians on my team, so I'm able to relate to them. And I think that's important. If you can't relate to your staff, like how can you help them out? And um, I think by nature, I do, I have like an urge to serve, I guess you can say, to kind of give back to my staff. The one thing I always tell my staff is, I'm your manager, I'm not your boss. Like I'm here to work for you guys, to make your job easier. So that's always a goal of mine, I've never been the type of manager who feels he's bigger than the operation. I very well know your staff is, like an integral part of the operation. So as long as you cultivate good staff and like I said, you're able to relate to them, work with them, you definitely bring the best out of your team. So
That's great. Yeah. And I often find that people don't get the professional training on how to lead others in a workforce. They just kind of say, you've been doing a good job. You're ready for manager. And they put you in charge of people. And so you kind of learn it along the way sometimes. So it sounds like you've really had successful opportunities to learn how to become a great leader. And I'm sure there's still even more as you grow in your career and your journey.
for sure. One thing to point out too is when I became a manager, to be honest with you, I really didn't do it for the money. Like I said before, I got to a point where I wanted more for myself, and not just money wise. Obviously, becoming a manager, your salary goes up, blah blah blah. But I did it more for personal growth because there's some things that I'm a natural introvert,
Mm.
so I don't like like being like in a leader, like in a leadership position, and for an introvert, kind of gives you anxiety, at times, you got to lead meetings. So that means, public speaking and things of that nature. So I told myself, becoming a manager will elevate you as a person. Don't mind the money and stuff like that. That's not what I'm doing it for. I mostly did it for personal development. And it's been one of the best decisions I made as an adult because, I have grown as a person under this job, under this position. So
Excellent. I'm an introvert as well. And I feel like being extroverted, high energy, meeting with groups, it's like it's a learned behavior. It's not something that's innate as an introvert. You want to just climb up
exactly.
your shell and recharge. Um, so yeah, kudos to you for recognizing that and knowing what it takes to be a good introverted leader.
Mhm. Thank you.
Um, so when life becomes unpredictable for you, how do you stay clear-headed and centered as you move forward?
I've learned meditation these past 4 or 5 years. Every day when I wake up, give thanks to the universe. But that's how I'm able, well, also, like I said before, I'm very active as well. Like if it wasn't for cycling, you know, I I'll probably drive myself crazy. Like I work in a high stress environment at work, so definitely meditating, being active, being physically active, going out there on the bike. Like I said, I did 100 miles yesterday. That's very for someone like me, that's very therapeutic. I know a lot of people call me crazy for doing that. They don't understand, but yeah, that's pretty much how I cope with that.
Okay. That's good because, oftentimes, especially when we have a family and a partner, it's like we focus on everyone else, making sure they're taken care of, they have everything they need, and we don't do the self-care
Right.
that we need. And so it's good that you have that as an outlet for you. It's therapeutic and it helps you clear your mind, and that's great. Um, what's one expected lesson in your career journey that taught you something that you really didn't expect?
An expected lesson in my career. Hmm, it's a good question. I don't know. Can you give me an example? I don't.
Yeah. So maybe it's becoming a leader, and maybe you viewed leadership as, telling people what to do. I'm just making this up again.
Oh,
And
okay.
when you became a leader, you're like, oh, it's not about that at all. It's about getting out of their way and letting them do the work and building trust. So, one lesson that you're like, oh, I didn't realize this is what this was. And now I do. And so it helped develop you into who you are today.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Being confrontational. Um, going back to being an introvert, confrontation is something that we're not comfortable with. But in this position, especially being that I work in a unionized environment, so I'm dealing with the union a lot and union workers, and being confrontational is a huge part of this job. And that's something that I really had to get comfortable with. But that also translates in life too. Now outside of work, being in this position has made me way more comfortable with, confrontation, basically. Like, these days, one thing I learned during my years of management is whenever there's an issue, confront it immediately. Don't let it rest. Don't let it settle until it gets to be something bigger. So that's definitely a lesson that I took from work into my, I guess, like my personal life or whatever. That was definitely like an unexpected lesson that I got from work. Learning how to deal with confrontation.
Okay, so can we go deeper on that a little bit?
Sure.
Well, confrontation can be very, difficult and challenging, right? How you approach it. When you experience a situation where you feel like it needs to be confrontational, how do you communicate? Like, how do you manage what you say? Do you just go right in for the jugular and say, no, I disagree, and here's why? Or how do you manage that conversation?
It depends on the individual. Yeah, it depends on the individual. I mean, I always go into these. So usually, what I'll do is I have a one-on-one meeting, um, in my office or whatever the case may be, and I always remain neutral. I'm not. I don't sit there point fingers. I don't like to start it off that way. But basically, like the energy that I bring to these competitions is basically, let's hash it out. Let's talk like adults. Whatever's on your mind, you know, you're free to express yourself. I don't take anything personal, so whatever the case may be. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it's different with with every person. So, but I like to stay neutral with things like that. So,
Okay. What one unconventional piece of advice that you received, something that's not normally advice you give someone, but an unconventional piece of advice that you got that actually ended up being very valuable? So maybe at first you were like, well, what does that mean? Somebody's telling me to do this or that, public speaking or anything you did where it was like, I'm good. I don't understand why that's a good piece of advice. But then after you completed your journey, you're like, oh, now I see where they were going with it. Did you have any experiences like that? And if so, what was that like?
probably I remember my old VP, right before he retired, I called him just to kind of wish him, the best or whatever. And the one piece of advice he gave me was, you know, manage with your heart. Don't be so by the book with policies and things of that nature. If you feel like something isn't fair, go with your gut, go with your intuition. Basically what he told me is don't be so by the book. And that's also a life lesson as well. Go by your intuition, go by your heart. Obviously, within guidelines, like you can't go too far outside of the policies and things like that. But that's the one piece of advice he told me. And at the time, I was still pretty new to management, and I was like, like, are you supposed to be telling me this? Like, but later on, I was like, you know what? He's 100% right. A lot of times, you can't always go by the book, by policies and things of that nature. Sometimes you just got to go with your heart, and what you feel is fair for everybody.
I love that advice. And especially for someone who's new to leadership, right? Who doesn't, again, like I said, they throw you in there with no training and you're expected to learn and you do what you think is the best thing, but leading with heart is key. And so
Right.
thank you for sharing that. Um, and so when you reflect on your journey, maybe it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, overall, what legacy do you want to leave?
Legacy that I want to leave.
Mhm.
What do you mean, like what my long-term future would be, I guess?
Well, so as you think about where you are in 10 to 20 years, how do you want people to think of you, remember you, celebrate you?
Just as a good person, the one thing people remember you is how you made them feel. Um, I know that's a cliche term, but I am a believer that lead with love. I want to be remembered as a good person,
Okay.
pretty much. So,
Okay. So my last question is actually, I have two questions.
okay.
The first is, what has been your biggest compromise in life and career?
Biggest compromise. Um, Stepping outside my comfort zone. For so long, I kind of, you know, I just didn't want to step outside my comfort zone, and I definitely had to compromise that. And um, when it comes to doing that, there's a lot of feeling of nervousness, of not knowing what's next, and I just took the next step forward, and just faced it, I guess you can say. So definitely had to compromise that.
Took a risk.
Exactly. I just took the
Okay.
risk.
Okay. And then the last one is, what does success look like for you now, personally and professionally?
That's a good question. What I define for me as success is I want to get to a point where I'm financially free and working full time is optional. Basically, leaving this daily grind that I'm in right now. Being able to own my own time, being able to focus more on building my relationships with my loved ones, putting more focus into myself, having the time to do that. And also, hopefully, being able to be in a position where I'm able to give back to others. Like I realize as I get older, I realize, there's more to this life than just one thing. Everything is revolved around what do you want to manifest for yourself? What do you want for yourself? There's, like I do believe in the principle of, if you receive, you should be able to give as well. So hopefully I do want to be in a position where I'm able to give back, whether that be being a big brother, being a mentor to to like to the youth, you know.
Mhm. Well, Pierre, that is an amazing goal that you have for yourself. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing your story with us today. I know that you will inspire many with your journey and how far you've come from a young man. And so I wish you continued success on that journey. And I look forward to hearing the results.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
joining us, and we'll talk later.
Thank you.